There is a lion living on the edges of the Serengeti right now who should not exist. By every law that governs how lions are supposed to live and die, by every rule of the pride structure that has shaped lion society for millions of years, this lion should have been dead before he was 3 years old. He was driven out. He was beaten. He was left alone in a landscape that treats solitary young male lions roughly the same way the ocean treats a boat with no engine. It tolerates them for a while. And then it doesn't. But he didn't die. And what happened next is one of those stories that the savannah produces every so often, quietly, without announcement, in the tall grass and the dry riverbeds, and the copies where lions rest in the afternoon heat. Stories that no one fully witnesses from beginning to end but that leave evidence behind. Evidence written in the changed behavior of prey animals, and the sudden silence of other predators, and the territorial markings that appear where no markings existed before. It is a story about what happens when everything tries to destroy something and fails. About what exile actually produces in an animal that refuses to let it be a death sentence. About power and how it is built and what it costs and what it does when it finally arrives. Subscribe right now if you want to understand lions the way the lions understand themselves. Not the version from nature documentaries that compresses years of living into 50 minutes of highlights, but the real thing, the slow thing, the thing that unfolds across seasons and droughts and territorial wars and coalition politics that would not look entirely unfamiliar to anyone who has ever studied how power works among humans. Let's go. To understand what happened to this lion, you have to understand what being a male lion actually means in practice. Not what it looks like from the outside, which is impressive and photogenic and has filled more wildlife calendars than any other predator on Earth. What it actually means experientially, as a life that has to be lived day by day in an environment that is actively trying to kill you from the moment you draw your first breath. Male lions are, from the perspective of a lion pride, a problem to be managed. This sounds harsh, but it is simply true, and the logic of it is clear when you think about how a pride actually functions. A pride is, at its core, a coalition of related females. Mothers and daughters and sisters and aunts, holding a territory together, hunting together, raising each other's cubs together, in a social structure that has been refined over millions of years of pressure from the environment into something extraordinarily efficient. The females are the stable core of the pride. They are the ones who know the territory, who know where the water is in dry season and where the wildebeest cross and where the buffalo like to drink at dawn. Their knowledge is local and specific and accumulated over years of living in one place, and that knowledge is the fundamental resource of the pride. Everything else is organized around it. Males are temporary. This is the brutal arithmetic of lion social structure, and it is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Male lions are born into prides, but they are not born for prides. They are born to leave, to go out and fight their way into a position of reproductive access somewhere in the wider landscape, and then to be displaced in their turn by the next generation of challengers. The average tenure of a male lion as a pride male, as one of the coalition that holds a territory and the resident females, is roughly 2 to 3 years. Some are shorter, a few are longer, but the fundamental trajectory of a male lion's adult life is displacement. He will be driven out. The only question is when, by whom, and whether he survives it. The males who are born into a pride are tolerated through cubhood and into adolescence. They nurse from their mothers, they play with their siblings, they learn what cubs learn, which is less than we might imagine because lions do not actually teach their young very much in the deliberate way that some other animals do. Cubs learn by watching and by playing and by gradually being included in the activities of the group. By the time male cubs are 1.5 to 2 years old, they are beginning to grow the first shadowy evidence of the mane that will eventually define them, and they are beginning to cost more to the pride than they contribute. They are not yet effective hunters. They are large and increasingly demanding in terms of food. And the adult males of the pride, the ones who currently hold territorial rights and breeding access, are becoming less tolerant of them. Between the ages of 2 and 4, most male lions are expelled from their birth pride. Sometimes this happens through active aggression from the resident males, who drive the adolescents out with increasing ferocity as the young males grow large enough to begin looking like competitive threats. Sometimes it is the females who become less tolerant of young males who are approaching sexual maturity and who represent a potential complication in the reproductive management of the pride. Sometimes the young males simply begin to range further and further from the core of the pride territory, and one day the ranging becomes permanent. However it happens, the result is the same. Young male lions end up alone or in small groups with other expelled males, in a landscape where they hold no territory, have no established food source, have no coalition support, and are liable to be killed by any established adult male who finds them in his territory. This period, which researchers and field biologists sometimes call the floater phase, is the crucible in which male lions are made or destroyed. It is the filter through which all males pass and through which most do not survive. Starvation, because young males are still learning to hunt and are not yet efficient at it. territorial conflict with established males who will kill adolescent rivals without hesitation. Conflict with other predators, hyenas particularly, who will mob a solitary young lion and kill it if the numbers are right. Disease. Injury from prey animals because a lion hunting alone takes risks that a coordinated pride hunt distributes across multiple animals. A solitary lion that catches a buffalo has to deal with that buffalo alone, and a buffalo that is not yet dead and has nothing left to lose is one of the most dangerous animals in Africa. The ones who survive this period are not simply the biggest or the strongest, though size and strength matter enormously. They are the ones who make the right decisions under pressure, who learn quickly from encounters that do not kill them, who find other males to coalition with, who read the landscape well enough to stay out of fights they cannot win while winning enough fights to matter, who manage hunger and injury and exhaustion across months and years without resources and without a safety net. They are survivors in the deepest sense of the word, and what the floater period does to a lion that comes through it is forge something. It builds a specific kind of competence and toughness that pride-born lions who achieve early comfort never fully develop. Our lion, the one this story is about, went through the floater period in a way that was notable even by the standards of a process that is uniformly brutal. He was expelled early and alone, without the coalition of brothers or cousins that gives young male lions their best chance of survival. A coalition of 2 or 3 males is exponentially more powerful than any one of them individually, and most males who survive the floater phase do so as part of a group. Our lion had no group. He had been a somewhat marginal figure even within his birth pride, smaller at birth than his siblings, less assertive in the daily competition for food that shapes how cubs develop, the kind of individual who gets less than his share across 100 small interactions and therefore grows slightly less well than he might have, the kind of individual that hierarchies at every level tend to overlook and deprioritize. He was expelled at roughly 23 months. Not dramatically, not in a single confrontation, but over the course of several weeks during which he was driven from food at every kill, chased from resting spots, pushed further and further toward the edges of the territory by animals who were simply done tolerating him. And then one day he was outside the boundary, and the boundary held and he did not find a way back through it, and the floater phase began. What followed was 2 years. 2 years of a life that most lions do not survive even 1 year of. He ranged across a vast area, following the movement of prey, learning the edges of territories by finding them the hard way, getting driven off. Sometimes getting badly enough hurt that he had to lie still for days at a time and let his body repair itself before he could hunt again. He scavenged when he could not hunt. He hid from hyena clans when they outnumbered him too severely to challenge. He watched other coalitions of males from a distance, and learned the rhythms of their territories and their weaknesses without being seen himself. He ate badly for months at a time, and then ate well for a few days and then badly again. But he was learning. This is the thing about the floater phase that the raw mortality statistics obscure. The individuals who survive it learn at a rate that has no parallel in the more comfortable life of a pride male with established territory and access to the cooperative hunting of a female coalition. They learn how prey moves through the landscape across seasons. They learn which copies offer sight lines over the broadest area and which ravines can conceal an approach to within striking distance of a herd that has not been spooked. They learn how to read the wind. They learn how far a zebra will run before it stops and looks back. They learn which other predators they can displace from a kill and which ones they cannot. They learn to eat fast and efficiently when they have food because they have learned painfully that food can disappear quickly in a landscape full of competing animals. They learn how to be a predator in the complete sense, not just the execution of the hunt itself, which pride females handle most of, but the entire strategic intelligence of finding, approaching, taking, and holding food in a competitive environment. And our lion, ranging alone across 2 years of the harshest education the savannah offers, was learning all of this. And he was growing, not just in size, though he was growing in size too, filling out across the chest and shoulders in the way that male lions do in their 3rd and 4th years, putting on the mass that will eventually make him one of the largest animals on the landscape. He was growing in something harder to measure but more important. He was growing in capability. In the depth of his understanding of this landscape, in the quality of his decisions. At around 3.5 years old, something shifted. Not a dramatic single event, a gradual change in how he was operating. He stopped running from confrontations that he might be able to win and started choosing some of them, not recklessly, carefully, with a selectivity that indicates an animal assessing odds rather than simply reacting to threat. He began to push back against hyena mobs that were not quite large enough to guarantee their own safety. He began to hold kills instead of fleeing from them, using the cover of darkness and the natural features of the terrain, a termite mound here, a dense thicket there, to make it harder for competitors to rush him simultaneously from multiple directions. He was applying what he had learned. And then, at roughly 4 years old, he encountered 2 other males. The dynamics of male lion coalitions are complex and are not fully understood even by researchers who have spent careers studying them. What is understood is that coalitions between unrelated males form regularly, that they can be as powerful or more powerful than coalitions of brothers, and that the formation of a coalition is one of the most consequential events in a male lion's life. A male who finds two other competent, compatible males to partner with goes from being a marginal floater with limited territorial prospects to being a serious contender for established territories. The arithmetic of 2 or 3 adult males versus resident males defending a territory is brutal in its implications for the residents, because the challengers, if they are well matched and coordinated, typically win. The two males our lion encountered were themselves floaters, somewhat older, more experienced even than he was, who had been ranging together for about 8 months. They had formed a workable partnership, hunting together and defending kills together and avoiding the territories of established coalitions together, but they were beginning to feel the pull toward a more settled arrangement, toward territory and females and the reproductive future that territorial control represents. They were looking in the way that lions look for things, which is less deliberate than it sounds and more like a gradual gravitational attraction between conditions that are ripe for change, for a third. The three-way coalition that formed between our lion and these two males over the course of several weeks did not form through any process you would recognize as negotiation. It formed through proximity and tolerance, through a series of encounters that did not end in aggression, through shared meals around the same kill and shared rest in the same shade, through the gradual establishment of a mutual recognition that was more useful together than apart. It is one of the most important things that lions do, and it looks from the outside like almost nothing. 3 young males sleeping near each other, eating from the same carcass without fighting, moving in roughly the same direction when prey moves, and then one day the movement is coordinated and the kills are coordinated and the territorial marking, the roaring and the scent marking and the aggressive patrolling of a defined boundary is coordinated, and there is a coalition. And then the real story begins. There is a territory in the central Serengeti that had been held for several years by a pair of males. Not a coalition of 2, but the better part of 4 prime years holding a territory with a coalition, which means they had been holding it for what by lion standards is a long time, long enough to raise several cohorts of cubs to sexual maturity, long enough to cement the loyalty of the females in their territory through shared experience and successful defense, long enough to get slightly older, slightly less reactive, slightly slower in the speed of a full charge than they had been in their first year of holding the territory, not weak, not old, not easy to displace, but no longer at the absolute peak of what they had been. Our 3 males found this territory the way floaters always find established territories, by ranging across the edges of it, testing the response of the residents, reading the scent markings and listening to the roars that define where one male's world ends and another begins. They retreated from the first encounter with the residents. They were not ready. The residents were larger than expected, and the charge they mounted in defense of their boundary was fast and confident, and the 3 young males made the right decision, which was to not die on that day in that place when the odds were not yet right. But they came back, not immediately, weeks later, and this time they held their ground a little longer before withdrawing, and they were roaring now in the evenings from positions just outside the territory boundary, the long territorial roar that travels 5 kilometers across the nighttime savanna and that communicates things that are too complex to fully translate, but that every lion who hears it understands. We are here, we are multiple, we are not leaving. Consider what that means for what happens next. The psychological pressure that a coalition of 3 applies to a coalition of 2 through sustained presence and vocal challenge is not nothing. It is a form of warfare that precedes the physical confrontation and sometimes determines its outcome before the first physical blow is struck. Animals who have held a territory for years and who have grown accustomed to their position in it have something to lose, and animals who have something to lose approach existential confrontations differently than animals who have nothing to lose at all. Our 3 males had nothing. They had each other, and they had 2 years or more of accumulated survival skills, and they had the particular quality of attention that hungry, territory-less lions develop when they have been surviving on raw competence for long enough. The resident males had comfort and familiarity and the weight of what they stood to lose. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not cinematic. Most serious wildlife confrontations are not cinematic. They are brief and violent and chaotic and decided very quickly by a combination of physical factors, size, strength, speed, coordination, and psychological ones, the will to press an attack versus the will to break from it. What can be said is that it happened at a waterhole in the early morning, that it lasted less than 4 minutes, that both resident males were injured, that one of them was injured badly enough that he was still limping 3 weeks later when field researchers documented him at the periphery of what had been his territory. And that when the dust settled and the light strengthened and the birds that had scattered in the chaos returned to the acacia trees around the waterhole, 3 young males were walking across the territory that was now theirs. Our lion walked it for the first time as its owner in the low golden light of a Serengeti morning, and what he would have perceived in that walk in the sensory register of a lion was the smell of a landscape he had been studying from the outside for months, now surrounding him in every direction, the smell of the females who held this territory, the smell of the cubs they were raising, the smell of the kills that had been made here and the specific vegetation of this specific piece of ground. He marked as he walked, he roared when he rested. He was, in the language of lion biology, establishing residency. This is the moment the story has been building toward, but it is also crucially not the end. Because taking a territory is one thing and holding it is another, and the holding requires everything that the taking required and then adds to it the specific demands of the established male role, which are more complex and more consequential than the floater life in certain ways, even though they are also more comfortable. The females of the territory presented themselves to the new males with the kind of careful, wary assessment that female lions apply to territorial changeover. This is a dangerous moment for females and particularly for cubs. Male lion coalitions that take over a territory engage in infanticide, killing the cubs of the previous males, because the cubs that are currently nursing are genetic investments by rivals not by themselves, and because the females who are nursing will not come into estrus again until they stop nursing, which means the new males cannot begin their own reproductive project until the current cubs are weaned, which takes months, or until those cubs are gone. The evolutionary logic is unsentimental and the behavior it produces is brutal by any ordinary measure. But it is the context in which the behavior of every individual in the drama must be understood. The females resisted, as female lions always do. They protected their cubs, clustering around them, driving away or attempting to drive away the new males with a ferocity that is one of the most aggressive behaviors in the lion's behavioral repertoire. Female lions defending cubs against infanticidal males are not deferential and they are not passive and they are capable of causing serious injury to males substantially larger than themselves. Some cubs survived, some did not. The arithmetic of territorial takeover played out as it has played out across the entire evolutionary history of the species, without sentiment, without good guys or bad guys, simply as the mechanism by which the genetic succession of a territory is managed. What came after the consolidation of the territory was a new kind of test for our lion, not the survival test of the floater phase and not the combat test of the territorial challenge, a management test. The question of whether the qualities that had gotten him here, the endurance, the strategic patience, the capacity to read a situation and act at the right moment, would translate into the different set of demands that territorial life made. Territorial male lions are, in behavioral terms, primarily a defensive investment by the pride. Their primary value to the females who tolerate their presence and feed them a significant portion of their food is territorial defense. They patrol, they mark, they roar, and when challengers appear, they fight. The quality of their territorial defense determines whether the females can raise cubs to maturity in a stable, secure environment or whether they are constantly disrupted by the turmoil of territorial challenges. The best territorial males are not simply the physically strongest. They are the ones who manage the territory intelligently, who respond to challenges decisively and early enough to prevent them from escalating, who maintain the coalition with their partners effectively, who make the right call about when to fight and when to roar from a distance, and when to simply maintain presence. Our lion's years in the floater phase had given him something that many pride-born males who achieve territorial status through relatively smooth routes never develop. He had a complete map of the threats in this landscape, because he had lived among all of them for years. He knew where rival coalitions ranged, having skirted the edges of their territories as a floater. He knew the movement patterns of every major prey species in the region, having hunted all of them alone and learned their behavior in the thorough, detailed way that only solo hunters fully develop. He knew the landscape at a granular level, every feature of it, the blind spots and the sight lines, and the places where a challenge could come from an unexpected direction. And he had something else that the years of solitude and hardship had built in him, and that is harder to name than tactical intelligence or physical capability, something in the quality of his attention. A way of being in his own landscape that was more thorough and more constant than what comfortable animals typically develop. Animals that have been genuinely at risk for extended periods, develop a different relationship to their environment than animals who have been secure. They are not anxious in a dysfunctional way. They are simply more present, more consistently aware of what the wind is carrying and what the birds are doing and what the silence means when it arrives at a time when there should be sound. This quality, this depth of situational awareness, is not something you can acquire without the experience that produces it, and our lion had spent 2 years acquiring it in the most demanding possible school. The territory stabilized, not quickly because stability in a lion territory is a process of months and seasons, not days, but it stabilized. The females who had initially been wary of the new males began to synchronize their estrus cycles, which female lions in stable situations do, producing cubs at roughly the same time so that the communal cub rearing that is one of the pride's great advantages can function. The first cubs that were sired by our coalition were born in the long grass of the dry season, small and spotted and blind, hidden in the dense vegetation that the females had chosen for exactly the camouflage it provided. Our lion met those cubs for the first time in the way that territorial males always do, with the specific combination of caution and intensity that male lions bring to the investigation of very young cubs. There is always a moment of tension in these encounters, because the cub cannot read the male and the male is reading the cub with the full intensity of his biological interest, which includes information about the cub's genetic relationship to him, about the cub's health and viability, about the cub's sex. What happened when our lion lowered his massive head to investigate these cubs, the way his eyes tracked them, the way his body, which had been tense with the automatic wariness of a large predator investigating small vulnerable animals, gradually eased as the information registered, was the beginning of the next chapter of his life. The chapter in which, for the first time, his survival was not only about him. Territorial males who are good at the role develop a relationship with the cubs of their pride that goes beyond simple biological interest. They play with cubs. They tolerate from cubs' behaviors, climbing on them, chewing their tails, ambushing their legs that they would never tolerate from any other animal. They are patient with cubs in a way that is visible and specific and not what you might expect from animals who are otherwise so focused on dominance and territory and threat assessment. The best territorial males, the ones who hold their positions longest and whose females raise the most successful cohorts of young, are not necessarily the most physically imposing. They are the ones who make the pride feel safe in the deepest sense, the ones whose presence reduces the background level of anxiety in the entire group, whose confidence in their own territorial management is steady and reliable enough that the females can focus on the business of raising cubs instead of spending energy on vigilance. Our lion became this kind of male, not immediately and not without mistakes. He misjudged a boundary confrontation early in his tenure and had to retreat from a challenge that he should have managed differently, a lesson that cost him 2 weeks of healing time and cost the coalition some of its authority at one edge of the territory, which they had to rebuild through sustained presence and roaring over the following month. He had a period during the height of a particularly severe dry season when prey animals were scarce, and the entire pride was hungry, and the tension between the females competing for food and the males' demands on the kills created a friction that nearly broke apart the delicate social fabric of the group. These were real difficulties, managed imperfectly in real time. But the trajectory was upward, the territory held, the cubs grew. The female coalition that had been disrupted by the takeover began to function again at the level of efficiency that a stable, experienced group of related females achieves over time. Hunts became more coordinated, kill rates improved. The territorial boundaries, marked and defended consistently by a three-male coalition operating at something close to its peak capacity, began to be respected by neighboring groups in the way that well-defended territories always eventually are. Not because the neighbors gave up entirely, because the cost-benefit analysis of challenging a well-run territory with a competent coalition, continuously defending it, was not, for most would-be challengers, favorable. There is something that happens in a well-established lion territory that is difficult to describe in purely mechanical terms but is entirely real. The pride begins to function as something that is more than the sum of its parts. The females, secure in their territory and their food supply and their cub survival rates, become more coordinated in everything they do. The hunting becomes almost telepathic in its coordination, which is not actually telepathy but is the product of years of shared experience, of females who know each other so well that they can read each other's intentions from body posture at 100 meters. The cubs benefit from this stability in ways that compound over time. The mothers who are not anxious and underfed raise cubs who develop better. The cubs who develop better become better hunters and better defenders and better mothers in their turn. Stability builds stability, and it does so through mechanisms that are biological and behavioral simultaneously. Our lion was the tent pole of this stability, not alone. His two coalition partners were critical to what the territory was and what it could sustain. But among the three of them, he had developed into the one who managed the day-to-day reality of territorial life with the greatest depth of competence. His range within the territory was larger. His vigilance was more constant. His response to external challenges was faster and better calibrated. His relationships with the females of the pride were more settled and less contentious. He was, without ceremony or acknowledgement, the fulcrum around which the territory's functioning organized itself. The first real test came in the second year. A coalition of 3 males from the north, younger than our coalition, hungrier, in exactly the same position that our lion had been in 3 years earlier, ranging the edges of established territories and looking for the right moment and the right weakness to exploit. They were very good, better than the pair of resident males had been when our coalition had displaced them. Larger individually and better coordinated as a group, the product of being 3 brothers from the same birth cohort rather than 3 unrelated males who had found each other in the field, with the coordination advantages that brothers who have played and fought and hunted together since cubhood bring to coalition dynamics. They began the pressure campaign that our lion knew from the inside because he had run the same campaign himself, the roaring from outside the boundary, the close ranging that was just inside the tolerance threshold for a violent response, the testing of different points along the perimeter to find where the response was slowest. He recognized what they were doing, he had done it himself. And so he did not respond to it the way a territorial male who had come to the role directly from a stable background would respond. He did not react to each provocation as it came. He was not drawn into the escalating cycle of challenge and response that uses up energy and reveals patterns and confirms for the challenger exactly where the defenders are strongest and weakest. He managed the pressure strategically, responding to some challenges and not others, keeping the challengers uncertain about where the line was and when crossing it would produce a response, moving the coalition's defensive effort around the perimeter in ways that made it impossible for the challengers to establish a simple model of how the territory was being defended. He had learned this, not in any deliberate school but in the years of ranging the edges of other males' territories and testing their responses and learning from what he found. He had been the one doing the testing then, and he had learned what worked and what produced costly responses, and the symmetry of the situation was something he processed not as a thought but as a form of embodied knowledge, the kind of knowledge that lives in the body and the nervous system rather than in any capacity for explicit reasoning. The Northern Coalition pressed for 2 months, 2 months of sustained psychological pressure and territorial probing that would have exhausted and destabilized a less well-managed coalition. Our 3 males held together. They slept close together, which matters for coalition cohesion in ways that are easy to underestimate. They shared kills without the tension that splits coalitions under pressure. They moved as a coordinated unit when the northern males came close enough to require a physical response. The defining confrontation, when it came, was at a rocky ridge in the northeast corner of the territory, late in the afternoon, with the light coming low and golden from the west and the heat of the day just beginning to ease. The Northern Coalition had made a mistake, coming into the territory proper rather than simply ranging the edges, drawn perhaps by the smell of a kill that the females had made that morning, or by a miscalculation of where the boundary actually ran, or simply by the accumulated impatience of 2 months of pressure that had not broken through. Our lion saw them before they saw him. He had been resting on the ridge in the shade of a granite overhang, perfectly still, the color of his coat blending into the dry grass and rock in the way that lions blend when they are not moving, when the whole landscape works to make them invisible. He did not move when he saw them. He watched them come. He assessed them at their most natural and unguarded before they knew they were being watched, which is when you learn the most about any animal or any person. He watched how they moved together, which ones set the pace and which ones were slightly behind, which one looked back more frequently than the others, which one's body language carried the slight tension that indicates the animal that is the least certain about the situation it is in. And then he roared. A lion's roar at full volume from close range is not like any sound you have ever heard if you have only ever heard it through speakers. It is physical. It lands on you like a weight. It fills the landscape not just with sound but with something more than sound, with a displacement of air and a vibration in the chest that bypasses the conscious mind and goes directly to the part of the nervous system that has been afraid of large predators for a very long time. From 20 meters on an open ridge with nowhere to go, it is the most alarming sound in the savanna. His 2 partners, who had been resting just below the ridgeline, invisible to the approaching northern males, heard his roar and understood what it meant the way that coalition partners who know each other deeply understand each other's signals. They came up over the ridgeline together, three animals appearing suddenly from an apparently empty landscape, and the Northern Coalition, caught in the interior of a territory they had entered without understanding who was in it, had a choice to make very quickly. They ran, not immediately and not without some of their own display, which is the instinctive response of large predators who are startled even when flight is the rational choice. But they ran. Our coalition pursued for several hundred meters, far enough to confirm that the northern males had genuinely left the territory and were not simply pulling back to regroup. And then they stopped and stood together on the open grass and roared, the three of them roaring together in the way that coalition partners do after a confrontation. In the sound that travels 5 kilometers and is simultaneously a territorial declaration and a celebration and a warning and a statement about the nature of this particular piece of ground. The Northern Coalition did not come back. This is not as surprising as it might seem. The cost-benefit analysis of territorial challenge is continuous and updated with each new piece of information. 2 months of sustained pressure had produced a decisive confrontation that went badly for the challengers and confirmed that the territory they were targeting was defended by a coalition that understood the game at least as well as they did. There were other territories. There were other resident coalitions elsewhere on the landscape who were older, slower, less well-coordinated. The northern males would range on and eventually find the right target, and they would challenge, and they would either succeed or fail, and the landscape would continue its continuous reorganization of power and territory and reproduction. But not here. This territory was closed to them. Our lion had made it so. In the time after this confrontation, in the seasons of relative stability that followed, something happened that is worth slowing down to notice, because it is easy to miss in the larger narrative of combat and territorial dominance and coalition dynamics. Our lion began to show up in accounts of his behavior that were less about aggression and more about something quieter. He had a specific relationship with one of the older females of the pride, a female who was probably 7 or 8 years old, who had survived the territorial changeover, who had lost cubs in the infanticide that followed, and then raised the next cohort successfully, who was by any measure the most experienced and capable hunter in the coalition of females. She was not the kind of female who sought out the male's company for any purpose other than the purposes that the pride structure required. She was self-sufficient in the way that experienced females become, needing nothing from the males that pure territorial defense did not provide. But in the afternoons, in the long quiet of the Serengeti's midday heat when all the predators rest and the landscape goes still, our lion and this female would sometimes lie near each other in the shade of the same acacia. Not always, not in any way that indicated a pair bond which lions do not form. Just sometimes, as individuals who share a territory and a history and a complicated relationship and a mutual recognition of competence will sometimes end up in proximity and find that proximity comfortable rather than contentious. Researchers who document lion behavior sometimes include in their notes these small details of social life that do not fit easily into the quantitative frameworks of territorial ecology. The male who tolerates being groomed by a cub who has just tripped over his tail. The female who positions herself between the sleeping coalition male and a group of approaching strangers not to protect him. She does not need to protect him, but in a kind of automatic alliance with the familiar. These are the texture of what it actually means to live in a lion pride, underneath and alongside all the territorial mechanics and the coalition dynamics and the reproductive mathematics. There is a social life that is specific and continuous, and that generates its own kind of knowledge about individuals and their particular qualities. The cubs of the pride grew. The first cohort that our lion had sired, the ones born in the long grass of the first dry season after the territorial takeover, were approaching 2 years old now, the age when their character begins to differentiate, when it starts to become visible who will be a floater that survives and who will not, who has the particular combination of qualities that the landscape will eventually accept. They were large enough now to be companions to the adult males, to follow the coalition on their territorial rounds, to sit with them in the evenings and watch the sunset with the same unfocused alertness that lions seem to bring to that specific time of day when the light changes and the prey animals begin their evening movement. Our lion had outlasted everything that had been stacked against him. The early marginalness within his birth pride, the solo expulsion into a landscape that kills most males in his position, the 2 years of genuine hardship and genuine danger and genuine hunger that had forged what he became, the competition from other coalitions for the territory that was now his, the sustained challenge of the northern males that he had managed well enough to repel decisively. And the thing that is most worth understanding about all of it, The thing that the story is pointing at through all the details of territory and coalition and confrontation and survival is this. The outcast, the marginal one, the one nobody feared, did not become powerful in spite of the hardship he went through. He became powerful because of it. The floater phase that should have killed him built the skills and the knowledge and the particular quality of attention that made him, eventually, exceptional. The loneliness that was meant to be a death sentence was the school that no comfortable path would ever have provided. This is not a comfortable moral. It does not fit into a simple narrative about adversity always being productive or suffering always leading to strength, because the majority of lions who go through what he went through do not survive it. It kills most of them. The odds were against him at every stage, and he was aware of those odds in the particular way that an animal whose nervous system is precisely calibrated to its survival environment is always aware of them. He was not brave in the sense of being unafraid. He was something more specific than brave. He was capable of being afraid and acting effectively anyway, of reading a situation that was genuinely dangerous and finding the response within it that was not the fatal one. The savannah does not celebrate this. It does not mark it. There is no ceremony when a lion who is supposed to die becomes the male around whom a territory organizes itself. The grass grows the same length. The acacia trees bloom in their season without reference to the particular history of the lion resting in their shade. The wildebeest do not know in the way that would register as knowledge why this particular territory's boundary roars carry a slightly different quality than some others. They know it in their bodies in the way that prey animals know territorial males, as a fact of the landscape that shapes their movement without requiring any explicit understanding. But the pride knows. The females know the particular male who manages their territory, in the continuous empirical way that animals who live together develop knowledge of each other. They know the quality of his patrols and the speed of his response to challenges, and the way he moves through the territory